He said that this article is the closest thing that you can get to determine what I'm voting. He didn't say specifically who
Okay,
he's
so
going to
that's
vote
different.
for.
So my statement was the following. You cannot say you believe in biblical principles and vote for the principles of the Democrat Party. They're incongruent. They do not fit. And that's not what I'll address John Piper.
I agree with you.
No, I know you agree. So I'm going to address the John Piper thing because I disagree with what he said. But my position is this. If you're a born-again Christian, by the fruit you will know them. And if the fruit is that I will cast my ballot for a party that had Gretchen Whitmer and Gavin Newsom and Eric Adams and Joe Biden spend more wording and video time on Easter Sunday talking about trans rights than the resurrection of our Lord and Savior, that supports the massacring of children via trans and also abortion, that you cannot be a Christian and vote for that. Now, John Piper did not say he was voting Democrat. So he doesn't even fall into what I'm talking about. So let's talk about John Piper. What John Piper is saying is that I believe abortion is wrong. Okay. I believe that the transing of kids is wrong. I believe all this sort of stuff. But I think Donald Trump is this unrepentant sinner. And I would say, Mr. Piper, what do you have to do with the story of Samson? Should he be in the Hall of Faith in Hebrews? According to our own script.
You want to stop there at the Samson point?
Yeah.
Yeah. So he just said a whole bunch.
Before we get to the Samson part,
yeah.
maybe we can cut it back a little bit.
Mm-hmm.
Is there anything you want to say on that little clip beforehand?
Yeah, he had really interesting points about how you cannot be a Christian and vote for policies or a party that supports policies that massacre children and that do all these things. And before we were recording, you had a really good take on that, where I think both of us would say, yeah, you can't vote for policies that murder people. That makes sense. But there are things, just to, give the benefit of the doubt to the Democratic Party, there are things that they also support that are probably more closely aligned to biblical values than what most people believe about the Republican Party. And so you want to get into those?
Yeah, so Kirk kind of sets the question up as, before we went into the Trump thing, as you can't vote Democrat because voting Democrat means you're voting to kill babies and to affirm certain sexual practices, right? And certain identities. So that's his point. Like, you can't vote and be okay with that. The problem is there's lots of things that the Republicans vote for that are also not biblical. Both sides support ideologies and policies that are both unbiblical. So to say that just because one side supports something that is unbiblical means you can't vote for them means you can't vote for anybody, because both sides support lots of things that are unbiblical, right? If you want to look at things, in my opinion, that on the right that are unbiblical, one of the main things that Christ talks about in the New Testament is the abuse of, and the whole Bible, especially the prophets and the minor prophets, is the abuse of power and wealth. And stereotypically, but you can also just look at Trump's policies from when he was in office. He bolstered the top 1%, brought tax cuts to the 1%, and overall it hurt the little guy. And you can argue with me, debate, not necessarily what this is for, but in my opinion, that's also an unbiblical practice, right? If you're bolstering the rich, that's clearly something that Christ was against, right? So we can talk about all of the nuance of all of that. I think that Democrats have much worse social policies, if that makes sense. There's a lot of progressive sexual ethics that the right is, or that the left is trying to push, and there's far fewer of those on the right. Of course, there are still a couple, right? Because there's still lots of non-Christian people on the right. So you still have a lot of bolstering of some of those things by some right-leaning people that still want some of those ideologies, but not as much. Most of the problematic, unbiblical things come with policy on the right, in my opinion. Over the left, I think, has a lot more problem with social ideologies and perspectives being correct, as you would with just progressivism in general. When you're talking about pushing the envelope of being a progressive, you're going to get a lot of bad ideas, in my opinion, unchristian ideas of trying to progress past what is healthy, if that makes sense. So, but to say that, you just can't vote for a party because they do, or they support this or that thing, I don't think that it's such a binary. You know what I mean? There's a very wide spectrum of what it means to be a Republican and what it means to be a Democrat. There's literally hundreds of categories within both types of Republicans and Democrats. If you ever take a political leanings test, there's hundreds of questions, and you could be anywhere all over this map. I literally took a 3-hour political leanings test one time because I was bored during COVID and I just had the 3 hours to blow. And so I took this big long test, you can be anywhere. You know what I mean? In those things. So to say that you can't be a Democrat or you can't be a Republican and it's unbiblical, I think it's just kind of a crazy statement to say.
Yeah. Yeah, it's definitely very controversial. And I would think that someone could say this to be intentionally controversial, to cause, controversy for the purpose of people getting attention. Charlie Kirk is not that type of person. Like, this is not the first time I've seen a video of him saying this. And so he's said time and time again this thing. I don't think he's trying to be just confrontational for confrontational sake. I think he actually believes this.
Mm-hmm.
And I would say, like we said, we agree you can't vote for some of these social issues. Deletion of babies, letting children go through with gender decisions that are irreversible without their parents' consent when they're not even old enough to drive. Yeah. Like, that is like, you can't do that. But that's
crazy.
Also not every Democrat. That's like the most extreme view. And like we talked about, there are good things that they also have, like they want it to have an easier time to have healthcare. That's awesome.
Mm-hmm.
I think all of us would agree it'd be easier to have healthcare. I think everyone our age is upset about the housing market and how expensive that is. It'd be great if there was something that could help there. Now, I don't know which party would help the most there. Maybe the Republicans would help there because tax cuts, that's what they say all the time, but who knows? Not an economist or a politician. But also, like, education. Education does not need to be this expensive,
Mm-hmm.
And so there's things that they could offer and they bring it to the table. Now, someone could rebuttal and say, "Well, Ethan, Democrats are not helping the education because Democrats are
put all these books."
What's that?
In the schools. They're putting all these books in the schools that are
also
propagandizing the children.
Yeah. But also they tend to be, liberal and Democrat usually go hand in hand, just like conservative and Republican.
Sure.
And, conservatives and Republicans don't want big government, which means government should not be involved in education, i.e. student loans. So maybe the liberals would actually not help that either. So maybe that's a little bit more of a Republican thing, just as I'm fleshing this out.
It's nuanced, yeah.
It's everything's nuanced. And we do want to progress as a society, but we want to progress in the right ways. Mm-hmm. And so just because those who claim to be the progressive ones have crazy beliefs doesn't mean everything that they present is a bad idea.
Mm-hmm.
Like, healthcare, be awesome. But the unfortunate reality is you can't really have universal healthcare that's quality without ridiculous taxes, especially in a system like America that has 350 million people. Unless you left it up to the states. This is what I think. Let every state operate kind of like their own country, almost like completely, as free as you can make them, and let every state decide what laws they want to pass. And you'll have super progressive states, you have super conservative states, and you'll see which ones will be the best. You'll see in like 10, 20, 30 years the fruits of those policies, and you'll see which one's the best, and then we'll know. Rather than having so much control at the top.
Yeah. I think what most leftists will say, and stereotypically, not every time, of course, but if you just go off of policy over the last few years of what liberals and conservatives act like, at least in their policy, usually conservatives are more, like you said, pro, like, smaller government, and liberals are more pro bigger government. The reason liberals are bigger on government is because they hate corporations and want to take down corporations that are controlling you. And, the opposite's kind of true on the right. They're more pro-corporation and anti-bigger government. And there's arguments on both sides, right? No one likes government oversight. No one wants to be controlled by the government. At the same time, the reason we can't afford anything is because all these corporations are jacking up the price of housing, like you said, and jacking up the price of food, which is giving us really like a simulated inflation that's not even real. Like, there's literally business calls where all these corporate CEOs are hanging out and they're like, we're just raising the prices not because inflation's here, because we can. So there's all of that too.
Crazy.
And of course, both sides are paid off, by big government, big corporation, whatever you want to say. So Russia. It's all nuanced, but the point is, right, because it's so nuanced, and me and Ethan aren't necessarily on the same side politically, and there's because it's so nuanced, because there's so many different ideas, because there's so many different solutions even that are presented for these ideas. You can't just say to someone, well, you can't vote for this side because it supports this, or you can't vote for that side because it supports that, and be like a one issue thing, because there is such a multiplicity of issues you could vote on and could want to get through. Someone could see, and we might get into this when we talk about abortion later on, which I think would be really important. But you can talk about the economic or the healthcare impacts on abortion versus just not wanting to be a thing in general. So usually, we'll talk about it later. But it's a little sneak peek. Yeah.
All right.